Hello, I'm Jack Brewer with Expanding Frontiers Research, and this is the Wayward Sons Book Group. Tonight we have on tap a jam-packed episode. We'll be further considering the activities of NICAP Director Donald Keyhoe. We'll be taking a look at some of the things that his supporting cast, like Richard Hall, got involved in, and we'll be taking a look at lots of interesting aspects of NICAP, even including a letter written to Donald Keyhoe by Betty Hill. We'll be considering what was and what was not stated by the Hills in the early aspects of the investigation of their now famous case. That involves as well considering the relevance of Dr. Benjamin Simon. This and lots more on this episode of the Wayward Sons Book Group. But first, before we dive in, I want to sincerely thank all of you for being here tonight. Allison's here. Welcome, Luis. Luis is a new participant in the group. He and I go back. We've recorded a number of discussions such as this over the years on YouTube and with different people and their groups. Rachel's here, Tanner Boyle, Randy, Brian, Jeff Knox, Stephen Long. I want to thank you for encouraging people to get involved with the group. And all of you watching at home, thank you for listening and following along. So, has anyone got anything that they observed this week going on in the UFO landscape, or any activities that you've been up to that you would be kind enough to share with us?
I just got this really cool zine from AP Strange that I just wanted to show off. Selected Weird Writings. I'm trying to read the title backwards. So.
Yes, from Selected Weird Writings from the Mind of AP Strange. Yes. And he does interesting work and can be found on YouTube. Luis as well has a Vector of Knowledge YouTube channel. We talk sometimes about Rachel's YouTube channel, UFO Sunset. Before we started recording, I was telling Tanner Boyle that I was recently listening to his latest episode at the Getting Spooked blog, where he writes and does a podcast. Would anyone else like to mention their activities or what they've been reading or listening to?
Well, I've kind of been largely avoiding the UFO topic the last couple days, sticking to some of the old school. But recently, I guess actually yesterday, Tim Binnall had Aaron Gullius on from Saucer Life, and it was nice to get some Professor Gullius in my life since he ended his amazing podcast last year. So that was enjoyable. That was the highlight of my week, along with Tanner's and the gang having a conversation, and also the last installment for now of Saucers, Spooks, and Kooks. So it was the disclosure I live for this week, in fact.
That's a really good point. One has to curate what they direct their attention at, and really good call with Binnall and Gullius. I'm looking forward to giving that a listen. And as you mentioned, Adam Gorightly and Saucer, Spooks, and Kooks never disappoints either. As the name suggests, it would not. Well, with that,
one of the best. Oh, sorry, I was just going to say one of the best titles in ufology, along with The Greys Have Been Framed, if I may so humbly add.
Yeah, Saucer, Spooks, and Kooks is a great title, especially for the subject matter. Yeah, that he deals with.
I don't want to sour the mood, but that there was a press conference this week, and I think relevant to this conference. I know, Steve. I know, but it's relevant to this conversation because we'll just talk about the theme of just like UFO blinders on and the double standard that is putting the onus on the government when you're sitting on the proverbial evidence. So I think that we were going to read that, and we're just seeing it again and again. We've talked about that, but history is repeating itself, and it was doing it yesterday. So I know it's kind of a sour subject, but it's easy to digest, or it's easy to dissect now in the context that we're seeing it.
Thank you, Brian. You're absolutely right as well. You're right on point. Are you referring to, I think there were some more discussions on Capitol Hill with some self-described
There was a
whistleblowers?
PR event. Yeah, a plea to Congress to be more involved in this and to ask more of their government to unlock secrets. That's essentially what it was. There wasn't any revelations or anything. It was something Donald Keyhoe would put on as a PR man. It's the exact same thing that we're seeing again and again.
Yes, yes. And I think you're really on point too with the term, UFO blinders and UFO tunnel vision. I think like when we say the term UFO, if you say it at a UFO conference, it invokes images of saucer-shaped craft and aliens, maybe science fiction movies, where if you had said it in the 1960s or 1970s in an NSA counterintelligence meeting, they would have thought that it must be about signals intelligence and counterintelligence operations. So it really is a matter of context and how one comes at a topic and how they look at it. Thanks for joining us, Sharon. I'm glad Sharon made it. I was just saying in her book group last night, where we're reading Den of Spies by Unger, that the more you become informed about that perspective, like how intelligence agencies work, how they operate, the more an insult to intelligence it becomes, in my opinion, to think that men like General Wiedemeyer and people that were involved in deception operations, high-level D-Day type World War II deception operations with visual imagery and dummy troops and dummy messages and that type of stuff would have been involved in activities that could arguably damage their standing just for fun. Like Tanner and I have discussed, they'd be well aware of the vetting process and they would not be involving themselves in things that would stand to damage their legacy or their careers if it was not their job, if it was not a professional capacity. And I think that that deserves to be said. And I think Brian's just on point that, there's another appeal to the UFO tunnel vision crowd in Washington,
They could say there is a safety of flight issue. They could say that there are dollars misappropriated, but they go with this, right? And you have to understand the motivations of like why this particular thing to focus on. It's got a lot of baggage, like you said, it evokes emotions. It gets people to act. Yeah,
absolutely.
If I could just intervene. So just touching on that point that Brian was making, does that mean have you guys read the Jeremy McGowan piece from, I think it was like a few months ago or so? He was talking about sort of how the UFO topic is being leveraged to kind of push Congress to increase funding for certain weapons or drone and counter drone programs and things of that sort. Do you think that that's kind of what's going on?
Oh, we had not considered that.
I think the proof is kind of in
Absolutely.
the pudding, because I mean, Trump can't help himself. He keeps shooting down drones on top of El Paso Airport, causing airport outages, supposedly planned tests, but they're clearly not planned. That in itself may be kind of a fronting operation to just sort of express we have this technology. Don't try drones. I think that's a possibility. I wanted to give a shout out to Billy Cox's coverage of he's more on the believer side than I am, but he's still one of the best writers in the UFO space. He gave a good first person journey of trying to watch the Capitol Hill speech on News Nation, and he was simply unable to because they kept cutting away from things. So then he winds up with Science Bob's live stream of the events, and it's a comedy of errors. It's a pretty good read.
Yes, old Billy Cox. I disagree with a high percentage of his personal opinions on UFOs, and I love to read him. He is a very talented writer. Yes.
Allison, don't you think that's a solid theory that
Yeah, I had never considered that either, but like totally, I mean, and it could be multiple things, of course, right? But
Sure.
that has to be a big component with SpaceX and Blue, like who knows, all that, Blue Origins.
100%?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, not to be pessimistic or completely cynical, but we've talked before about how honest people tend to not think about, God bless them, how they might be being deceived. And if we start coming at it more as an angle of what money motivations would be in a circumstance, that's going to cover a lot of stuff. And then what deception reasons might be involved, that's going to cover a lot, whether it's charlatans or intelligence agencies or what have you. And understandably, relatively honest people that are just interested in, I saw something in the sky once, I'd like to learn more about it, are more easily taken in by, I think Steve Long made a reference a week or two ago to this like self-righteous indignation of how like UFO disclosure activists present themselves as if they're civil rights leaders or something, you know, working for the people, like and Rachel had made a reference to that last week of like that this is just so important, like just drop everything you're doing and go to Washington to lobby for UFO disclosure, and like it'll end like the final scene from Fight Club or something, you know, like your life will just be different and no more credit card debt when you get UFO disclosure, you know.
I didn't want to comment on it really, but I was kind of surprised no one else commented on it, at least on social media, that they were clearly aping the like Epstein justice press conference. That's the first one of those that's been publicized that widely in quite some time. And I don't know, I think it's particularly ghoulish, given that UFOs in recent months have seemed to be a kind of a key distraction away from that subject matter.
Sure, just throw everything at the wall, right? Well, that takes us to page 199 of the PDF. And we're at the bottom of the page, starting with later in 1958. Would anyone volunteer, please, to read the first section? Thank you, Allison.
Later in 1958, Keyhoe was on another television show, The Mike Wallace Interview. Such public relations appearances were common for the NICAP leader. The tolerant but skeptical Wallace allowed Keyhoe plenty of room, but did indeed question some of his proclamations. Keyhoe asserted the same 4 points about official government documents as contained in his above letter. Wallace countered that the Air Technical Intelligence Center was contacted at the Pentagon and strongly disputed Keyhoe's claims about the contents and even the existence of the documents. The show host conceded, however, the issue really came down to a matter of why Keyhoe believed the Air Force would conceal such information and deceive the American public. Keyhoe argued the reasons involved minimizing panic and implemented as an analogy a famous Orson Welles radio broadcast, The War of the Worlds. It originally aired in 1938 and depicted a Martian invasion that scared the daylights out of listeners who thought it was really happening. The creative work was adapted into a film in 1953, just 5 years prior to the Wallace-Keyhoe interview. Mike Wallace referenced the previously explored Harvard astrophysicist Dr. Donald Menzel. His status was cited as a leading authority in the scientific community who held a dismissive view of UFOs. Keyhoe challenged the doctor's assessment, suggesting the man was simply wrong. "What would you like to see done about flying saucers that is not currently being done?" Wallace asked Keyhoe, a question I personally appreciated. Keyhoe's response included suggesting viewers write their congressmen and urge inquiries and hearings, circumstances that have since not proven particularly productive on several occasions, spanning multiple generations. As I write this, rumblings for congressional UFO hearings are once again making news cycles. In a fascinatingly paradoxical sign of the times, the video clip of the interview includes Mike Wallace holding a lit cigarette made by Parliament, the show sponsor. Wallace periodically takes a break from his no-nonsense investigative journalism to ironically explain the superior quality of the Parliament filter, findings, he asserts to the audience, to be confirmed by the United States Testing Company.
Thank you, Allison. Yeah, he was even smoking during the interview. That interview is on YouTube, and Wallace just casually smokes a Parliament to show how tasty they are and safe and everything, which is interesting. And at that time, it was as simple as just saying the United States Testing Company. You really didn't need to take it any further than that. Any other comments on that before we go on?
Well, that was an amazing read, by the way. I thought that was AI reading at first. It was so clear and perfect.
Congressional hearings, that's ridiculous. That'll never happen.
Never.
But okay, that bit but about the cigarette made me, I was laughing out loud with myself muted.
Yeah, it is funny. It's also a sign of, it's so American, isn't it? That Mike Wallace is hard-hitting investigative journalism. He's going at the key issues. Okay, time out, commercial, smoke these cigarettes. They're safe. They'll be fine. Talk about follow the money. I mean, there's no show without people buying Parliament cigarettes. So buy some of these. Okay, now I can go back to calling Keyhoe a fraud. Yeah.
Oh, that's
You know, it's interesting too because you have almost like news. Is it News Nation? News Nation, basically being like a media agent for some of these disclosure guys too, having them on, be like they're scheduled and they're gonna have time to talk about X, Y, and Z, and even I think like the Fox reporter Ducey almost gave like a high. I should look this up. He almost gave like a high five, like we're getting there. You know, it was like really weird how there was like breaking this fourth wall of them almost like being in a locker room together, like we're doing this. It's only the biggest story in the world, and you're sitting on a gold mine. We're so close to this lottery ticket that is going to get cashed in tomorrow for the last 70 years, and they're just like high-fiving each other. There's like TMZ inner looping too. Like they're basically get your influencer, get your UFO spokesperson, get them on. They're texting each other, right? Like, oh, when's the next drop of whatever coming, and then we want you on. It's we're on season 10 of this, right? And in of this saga, which is we're making money on. Might as well make money if we're going to be ridiculous, right?
Yeah, you remind me of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch when you say that. Speaking of other things I don't watch.
Yeah, and it's funny. I mean, like you just said, it's going on 10 years now. And if people were honest, I can't imagine how many people 10 years ago or 5 years ago, even when we were being co-opted to support congressional hearings and endless changes to law and programs and expenditures. I don't think that anybody thought the whistleblowers were going to come out and have nothing to offer but ambiguous language, like sentient plasmoids and stuff like that. Like it's almost like they're trying so much harder to sound smart and vague than just transparent and clear. And I don't know that anybody really had that in mind when this thing started. If we were to get honest.
Yeah, I think that they're disappointed. I mean, how could they not be? And it does kind of become like an email phishing scam that like they'll intentionally spell words wrong in order to like if someone will reply to this, then we already know that we have a certain qualifier, that if a person would respond to the email in the first place, it is kind of that way that if someone presents these anecdotes, subjective stories as scientific investigation, well, then you kind of already can qualify your audience as not being particularly scientifically literate or critically minded and we've talked about before, everything doesn't have to be scientific, but if you call it science, then by definition it has to meet certain criteria. And even just general research, there are certain protocols and guidelines for how you establish a fact or what's a credible source and what's an unreliable narrator and should be called such. And Suffice it to say, largely the UFO disclosure movement is supported by an audience that doesn't recognize those kind of things that seem to now be frequently in places of authority as elected officials and even in intelligence agencies.
Yeah, the story about the 4 alien races, like that's making the rounds even on Fox News, which is admittedly not the most scientific outlet, but it's at least meant to be kind of semi-establishment outlet, right? And who was it? Eric Davis and Hal Puthoff have said those things repeatedly, including to Congress people. And then we're also hearing the hybrid stories stuff as well, being told unironically by various people. So that could be sort of a litmus test, or that sort of Nigerian prince, language.
Yeah, it is. Good point.
Speaking of misspellings, I had someone on X tell me that the testimonies of pilots were beyond my compression today.
Can you break that down for me? I don't know what any of that means.
The testimonies of the pilots are beyond my comprehension.
I see.
But I was told that the testimonies of the pilots was beyond my compression.
I gotcha. I gotcha.
Beyond my compression too.
And it seems to me, Jack, that that today in the age of conspiracy is really upon us, right? And what you were just talking about as far as media literacy and just evidence standards and people being aware of that. It seems like they can cast a really wide net now for this stuff, because it's not just amongst fringe communities or conspiracy-minded people. The average person seems to be genuinely conspiracy-minded overall, and unaware of evidence standards and just proper discernment of information. It seems to be a growing problem. I attribute it to the damn media, the movies, the TV that we all grew up with, soiled us from the beginning. And now that we've reached the point where anybody, a pilot, even people that are in their 60s and 70s at this point, everyone has grown up in the same culture that has embraced this kind of topic and this type of conspiracism. And it's grown, I think, exponentially as the people ingrained with that since childhood have grown, and those not have passed on.
Excellent point. Who'd like to read next, please?
I'm happy to read.
Thank you.
In 1958, NICAP landed a researcher who substantially shaped its future. Richard Hall was born on Christmas in 1930 in Hartford, Connecticut. According to his resume, he enlisted in the Air Force in 1949. He enrolled at Tulane University in 1954 and graduated with a BA in philosophy and minor in mathematics. Hall first became aware of Keyhoe's writing in the early 50s while serving in the Air Force. A few short years later, while attending Tulane in New Orleans, he came across a letter written from Keyhoe to the college residence astronomer. By that point, Hall was publishing his own newsletter, Satellite, and immediately upon learning of NICAP, wrote Keyhoe and offered his services. It was after his 1958 graduation. Hall later wrote in 1994 that he set off the nation's capital on an adventure that would dominate my life until this day. He was soon offered a part-time position with a commitment from Keyhoe. It would become full-time as finances improved. The prospect of receiving any salary at all for investigating UFOs was irresistible, Hall wrote. He would go on to be credited with organizing NICAP subcommittees, coordinating a network of investigators, and editing publications, among other responsibilities and substantial contributions. A transcript of a 1958 article published in the Fayetteville Observer quoted Hall as stating there was no doubt in his mind UFOs were real. At did not necessarily have to follow that they were spaceships, he added, but identified that as probably the most reasonable explanation. Somebody knows a lot more about UFOs than they are willing to admit, Hall asserted, but the public in general is blissfully unaware that it is being deprived of the facts. Although NICAP enjoyed support among the UFO faithful, that was not the case with entirely everyone who kept an eye cast towards saucer hunting researchers. The late Jim Moseley had an infamous streak of skeptically minded humor, often portrayed in his long-running newsletter, Saucer Smear. In his 2010 book, Shockingly Close to the Truth, Moseley explained Hall occasionally contributed content to Saucer Smear while attending Tulane. Moseley added he thought Hall considered himself a high-powered intellectual and provided the following account. Sometime in 1958 or 1959, Hall and I had a telephone conversation concerning my attacks on NICAP. Almost before we began, he asked me if I was tapping our chat. I truthfully told him I wasn't and that I didn't own a tape recorder. I still don't. He kept coming back to this, alleging he could hear clicks on the line and so on. I kept denying it. Finally, Hall practically shouted into the phone that I was lying and that he knew I was tapping the call. I saw red, yelled paranoid into the phone, and slammed down the receiver. Things haven't been the same between this suspicious, ill-tempered, and very full of himself Dick Hall and me since. Longtime UFO proponent and author Jerome Clark expressed a different view of Hall. Under the sometimes fierce exterior, Clark wrote in a tribute to the late researcher, Dick was a warm, gentle, witty, and forever curious man. He had many friends, and all of us will never cease missing him. He was a giant in ufology's earth. Clark further suggested in his tribute to Hall, it was more apparent all the time the extraterrestrial hypothesis was a correct explanation for some UFO reports. This, Clark implied, further demonstrated the wisdom Hall and he possessed. I would not agree, and I would not be critical of Clark's choice to present the ETH in more of a factual context than matter of opinion. It has been said money is not the primary reason most people stay at a job, and the notion is certainly supported by a review of NICAP. Keyhoe addressed the organization's financial shortcomings in a 1959 director's report to the Board of Governors and panel of special advisors. He explained that he was often not drawing his own salary, and the organization was chronically behind in paying employees Richard Hall and Elizabeth Kendall. The latter, Keyhoe noted, worked 5 nights per week processing mail, filling material, and the like. Kendall often voluntarily worked for free or more hours than she was scheduled to be paid due to her interest of UFOs. Keyhoe indicated he sometimes paid her out of his own pocket when able. Keyhoe informed the board he gave Hall a full-time position due to Hall's abilities to analyze UFO reports, writes articles, handles correspondence, and such. Hall's experience with UFO research was noted, as was the fact he declined better offers than NICAP could match from other potential employers. According to the salary structure set up by the board in 1957, Hall should have been receiving $6,000 per year, or what would be the current equivalent of over $57,000, factoring inflation, as of writing. However, Keyhoe explained further, Hall was initially only offered $45 per week. The pay was eventually up to $270 per month, which would have been a little over $2,400 a month calculating inflation. At the time Keyhoe composed the 1959 report, he explained, NICAP had been unable in recent months to even pay Hall $45 a week. To add insult to injury, Hall lent NICAP money. Not only that, Keyhoe reported about failing to pay the young writer even his original salary. Hall has borrowed on the insurance to loan NICAP money. The 1959 report included an itemized budget. The budget excluded salaries is pictured below. The strong majority of expenses were costs associated with the printing of the publications of roughly $1,000 per month budget, a figure that would be over 9 times higher if we factor inflation. Substantially over half was allocated to printing, postage, and related items. That was certainly a factor in NICAP chronically failing to meet its newsletter commitments. If minimum salaries for Hall and Kendall were added to the equation, the payroll would substantially increase the total expenses before even counting the pay owed to Keyhoe. As future organizations and researchers learned, it was difficult to consistently raise that kind of money to pay people to specialize in UFOs. In a 1957 report, Keyhoe previously told the board the primary purpose of NICAP personnel was to investigate and report facts. This is our main job, he wrote with authority, underlining the final words of the phrase for emphasis. How well he understood the differences between reporting facts and trying to persuade people to agree with him may be at issue, but it seems clear enough he felt it was the NICAP purpose. Trouble was, Keyhoe could not count on NICAP for his livelihood. The funds just frequently were not available. According to his reports to the board, it was not unusual for him to spend more of his personal money on the organization than he earned. Financial challenges monetarily aside, we might still consider the reasons researchers of the era thought their work was urgent and justified full-time paid employment. It seemed UFO investigators of the 1950s were often under the impression flying saucers were interplanetary vehicles and that their perceived arrival was a relatively new occurrence. That might account for some of Keyhoe's passion and martyr-like behavior. It might seem much more difficult to envision how present-day ufologists continue to attach such urgency to the notion of extraterrestrial visitors and similar concepts, as if the ideas are novel or some important event is imminent, in spite of the fact the genre has collectively held that belief for some yet 70 years.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate you reading. And this on screen now is part of the operating plan that Keyhoe wrote to the board and explaining the financial woes in late 1950s. And you can see where he says investigation and reporting of facts. This is our main job. Yet he clearly, his actions acted as if lobbying Congress and accusing intelligence agencies of a cover-up would be the path to proving the existence of UFOs. Or at least that proved more fertile when you basically don't have evidence that's conclusive. Like you don't have proof. You have all kinds of evidence. I mean, every witness statement, every photograph, every click on the internet, it is evidence, but it's not necessarily good evidence. It's not scientific evidence. It's not conclusive proof. And I was thinking this week about Jeff and I were talking last week about, I had made the remark that Keyhoe didn't seem money motivated, and Jeff aptly brought up, but his books were pretty popular. Yeah, and see, I was saying that from a perspective of, and I bet Jeff's heard these stories too. If you know some of the old timers, you've heard stories about Keyhoe got donations, like he got given checks and then he didn't even deposit them. And like there's a story that goes around where he found one significant check behind his piano that he had just laid the check on top of the piano and then knocked it behind it. And eventually the donor was saying, my check hasn't cleared, what's going on? Which of course is just a terrible way to handle contributions, especially when you're constantly talking about how important it is people make donations. And that got me thinking, he may have been money motivated to use the organization as a stepping stone for his own personal career, but didn't see it as a viable means of ever really drawing a salary, and may have never intended to actually apply himself to functionally operating NICAP. So that was a good point you made, Jeff, last week, that just because he was a bad money manager with the organization doesn't mean he wasn't counting the pennies and nickels in his own bank account. Allison.
So this makes me wonder what if NICAP was kind of, seated by the intelligence community, why they wouldn't want to make sure that there was funding there. So this again kind of seems to me like, well, we're pressuring Congress. I don't know. I'm confused as to why they would just let it. I mean, obviously some of this had to do with Keyhoe's mismanagement, but I don't know. What does anybody think about that?
I think you're confused because it's confusing. Yes, absolutely. Luis and I were talking earlier. I don't even have a proposed explanation for what the intelligence community was doing. I just think they were doing something. And then I think there's other people that just got on the bandwagon for a variety of personal reasons. I don't know who all was read in. I don't know why. I have some guesses, but I think it's more complicated than some of the rather obvious guesses, like counterintelligence and figuring out who was leaking records. I think we have to cross-reference a lot of this stuff too. Like during these same periods, there were other researchers that were filing FOIA requests and knew things they shouldn't have known. To like we've mentioned, Stanton Friedman knew FBI file numbers to request that the FBI's the records show that they were concerned how he knew this. So for one thing, if the FBI and the CIA weren't trying to figure out who's leaking information and who's interested in obtaining it, they simply weren't doing their jobs. So like that's one part of it, but it does get complicated, Allison, that like the next chapter is about Colonel Joseph Bryan, that was a longtime CIA asset and psychological warfare expert and staple of the NICAP board. And he's credited with actually finally putting the hammer down and banishing Keyhoe from the organization. Why then? Why not 2 years earlier? Why not 2 years later? I do not have an explanation for that. I could guess, but I think it's Tanner Boyle recently had an intriguing conversation on his Getting Spooked podcast about things that CIA assets do, and you really don't know why. You can't. It's kind of a bird's nest knot of why. Can I confirm this? Can I confirm that? Why'd they do it? Why is this person involved? Why that person's involved? And it almost gets like flypaper, that it's just kind of like maybe the story just is intelligence assets are involved and we don't know why. Sometimes. I'm certainly open to other alternatives and thoughts.
I think if you look at every single member, you mentioned this in a book club before, that you could write a book on all of them. They all have their own motivations, their own complications. So there's no simple answer. I look at like Hillenkoetter and like his duality of like being a buddy, publicly saying that this is real, and then privately in front of Donald Menzel saying that we put this to rest, don't worry. He's just like kind of this, he's just being human. He's being a buddy and saying something out that he should to fit in and be in the position that he's in, but he's also privately talking to Donald Menzel to gain credibility with him. And then he wanted like prestige and credibility, and that's what you see today too. Is like it doesn't really make sense why they're doing it, other than like maybe the obvious of fame and attention and being an expert in something, like, but also not as simple as that. Like, you know, there's things that come up that complicate even further. But I think you have to do that for every single person, and then you can maybe understand an inch of this, right?
Yeah, yeah, I'd agree with that. I'll also mention that we visited earlier a General Wiedemeyer and how he bowed out after his name was published and said he didn't want anything to do with it. There are some talented researchers digging into this stuff, and I think in the coming weeks we're going to be able to link him even further to some contacts that were deeply embedded in deception operations and in deception operations in World War II and in planning D-Day with the War Department and things like that. And again, I find it almost an insult to intelligence to think that he would have been filling in on a voluntary NICAP advisory board recreationally or to do a buddy a favor or something like that. But I think we'll be digging some more into that in the coming weeks. Who else had something they wanted to add?
Is it possible that the CIA was like kind of scoping out different organizations or clubs in society, seeing which ones that they could leverage the best? And it could be like media, because, you know, Operation Chaos or something had to do with infiltrating the media. And maybe they just, the higher ups of the CIA decided that UFOs were not really a profitable avenue in that regard. So they kind of just circled the wagon, but then they dropped that. Maybe they did try to get money for NICAP stuff, as Allison was asking, like, why didn't they get money for it? But maybe they did try, but like the leadership at CIA didn't really think it was that useful at the time.
And something happened in the first 90 days. Remember, Keyhoe wasn't the original director, and they went through 3 treasurers in the first 3 months. Something was going on, and the fact that Keyhoe and others didn't want to later discuss it, like it would almost seem like everyone had some complicity in it, or it was embarrassing to everybody. Like they all were willing to act as if Townsend Brown and Council Services did what they were supposed to do and then just left, which doesn't really appear to be the case. But we have various anecdotes, but we don't have documentation of exactly why that was. But we can strongly link those people to intelligence agencies. And it doesn't require a lot of speculation to think why a treasurer would accept a position and immediately say, I don't think I'm the guy for this. He's seeing something happen that he doesn't want to be the stool pigeon for, you know, the person that is in charge of the bank account that doesn't have control of the bank account. One could reasonably speculate.
Well, and also I mean, the money issue, they anticipated so many more subscriptions or what people that would be interested that weren't. It didn't turn out that way. I don't know if that plays into this at all or not. But I just remember being shocked at what they anticipated versus what they ended up with.
Yeah, they were talking 500,000 people.
Yeah.
In 1956. And even though 14,000 in the late 1960s seems like a lot when you're thinking about $7 per subscription, it's not 500,000, no.
Well, and that could then also go to Lewis's point about that it wasn't as fruitful as they, not money wise, but like intelligence gathering or leveraging or whatever they were trying to do. There wasn't enough people interested, so well, that wasn't as important anymore.
And over 10, 12 years, it would change. The CIA directors changed, the Office of Policy Coordination changed, the directorates changed, and it can be all of the above at different times. And that's just one we've got over here on the shelf to take down. Like I think we talked about in another episode, we'd need to know during that era, like how Francis Stoner Saunders wrote about the CIA and the arts during that era. We'd need to know, like, how many nonprofit cutouts did they have that they just used periodically or never even really took advantage of or used for reasons other than moving money around, to really know how unusual it would be. You'd need a sample, to know how common it may have been. But it definitely was the era that the CIA was using shell companies.
I think even in the case of like the Saunders stuff, specifically like the Congress for Cultural Freedom, if I remember right, that only came out because of Ramparts magazine expose. I could be wrong on that. But the Ramparts editor had contacted the CIA to basically get like a confirmation or a denial. And then the CIA went ahead and basically released the fact that they had funded, I think, something like 30 nonprofit organizations that are all kind of around the same thing. And they did that just to kind of say like, oh, this isn't the scoop. We've already admitted this. And it makes you wonder if they were willing to basically say like, yeah, we ran these 30. It's no big deal. You have to wonder like just how deep the tendrils went at certain points in time.
Yes, yes.
Also, something Tanner said earlier, I think, that some debunkers, I'm not using that word in a pejorative sense, but like, strong skeptics, let's say, kind of.
I typically mean it in the pejorative sense.
Right. But people who, let's say, that they strongly don't believe, right, in the UFO, the ETH, idea, but they still demand kind of like a lot of documentation for, there's the government's doing this for like counterintelligence or something like that, using the UFO topic. They still say like, well, we don't have the documentation for it, so it's probably not true. But given the backdrop of everything that the CIA is known to have done at the time, using shell companies, using the media, psychological operations, etc., and what we know about its NICAP involvement, it would be naive to presume that they didn't have some important role. And I think that a lot of skeptics, like I think Mick West once said something kind of incredibly naive, in like he called it a conspiracy theory. But, that's not really a conspiracy theory. It's just like what the IC does, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
He
Right.
said the same thing about like, like the missing money in the Pentagon that gets attributed to like 9/11 stuff. Like setting that stuff aside, that like accounting is indicative of something deeply wrong, and he just kind of poo-pooed it. And it's like, oh, you're an accountant now.
One of the criticisms I have about what we might call the skeptical community to some extent, when it comes to UFOs, they're often as bad as the other side of the aisle, and they're only interested in, does this sighting have an alien in it or not? And if there's no alien in this story, then I'm going to dismiss it as uninteresting. And there's a lot of things that can still be really interesting about any given chain of events that don't have an alien in them, which would be like every chain of events in the history of mankind. There's some interesting events in there, I'm pretty sure.
So to bring up the sour event of that press conference, I like to middle ground this as well. I completely agree with what everyone said. There is something interesting there no matter what. It's not just nothing and move on. They said in the press conference, I think it was Bertelsen on the Reaper drone footage, like a movie, it was sitting on my desk from something. Well, what is that? Like, double click on that. Who is dropping a vague video on your desk, and what is the intent, and why? What do you think you're going to do with it? Like, that's a Jack Brewer book coming up, right? In 30 years down the road, when they figure out like who that person was and why they were doing that, and then their connections. It's not tinfoil. We're seeing it happen in real time here with evidence. So I think that's a really important point you guys brought up.
I agree completely. Yes. It's reminiscent of the older man that had the security clearance that I think it was Martin Marietta. What was his name? Boyle, I'm wanting to say, or Boyd Bushman. That he was exchanging photographs and things with coworkers, and they weren't of aliens, but clearly people were interested in having discussions with this man that had security clearance at a defense contractor about aliens, and had influenced him to be an activist for the government needed to be less secretive. That in itself is a story. Yeah. I don't care that there's no aliens in it. I want to know, so did like coworkers just think it was funny to give this guy pictures of aliens? And the FBI files, come to find out, indicated that Martin Marietta had contacted the FBI at one point and informed them they were concerned that bad actors were attempting to extract classified or proprietary information from him. So yeah, I mean, that's as much as a smoking gun as you're going to get of the UFO topic is being used to target people with security clearances, to turn them on their employers and start sharing classified information that they think has something to do with UFOs. Yes, that's a great point, Brian, and thanks for moving us into it. If you want to know more about Boyd Bushman, just do a simple search. I wrote about him at the UFO Trail. I think I've written about him at the Expanding Frontiers Research blog as well. Randy, Anything from you this evening so far?
No, I've just been enjoying the discussion. I was just looking at Boyd Bushman because I am interested in that. I was not familiar with that.
Yeah, it to me it was a very interesting case. Like when Brian said, that's a Jack Brewer book down the road. Absolutely. Like what kind of yahoos just putting video on some guy's desk? Absolutely. Odd place for a practical joke, isn't it?
I do that to my coworkers all the time.
Especially if you worked at a defense contractor and had security clearance. Yeah. Sharon, did you have something?
My dog wants to get in. Okay. It was back where it said there was an article printed in the Fayetteville Observer. All right, that would be Fayetteville here, Fort Bragg. Why would that be in that unless it was the information was coming out of Bragg?
That is a good point. What was the article about, Sharon?
Let's see.
The only reason I ask is sometimes when I'm searching newspapers.com, it'll be multiple cities and states, and I'll just pick one. But
gotcha.
Like if it's just an AP story. But your point's still valid that Fayetteville was and is a military town to some extent, and they would choose things they thought their readers would be interested in. Yeah.
Yeah. You have to drop the vil and make it really lazy and say "vul." If you're going to
say it, Bull.
There you go. Bingo.
Anyone with any comments, or shall we read some more?
Just briefly, were any of these characters involved with the Robertson panel? In the deliberations or the...
Yes. I don't think anyone we've specifically referenced tonight, but yeah, like Dewey Fournier and some others that their FOIA records are included in the book were involved. Yes. Some people, in fact, I think it's likely that, like I think last week, in fact, we were considering that Keyhoe's one of his letters to the CIA, where he was demanding, one thing or another, stated that he knew they had a secret panel in the early 1950s. And we were speculating that it probably wasn't difficult for the CIA to get an idea of that reference to the Robertson panel and how he would have known because of the contacts he had, like Fournier and others. Probably would not have been difficult for them to track if they wanted to track it.
Richard Hall gave him a write-up that they rejected, so that their participation was like, hey, if you're gonna do this Robertson panel, us as NICAP, here's all these cool cases, and they basically just like threw them in the trash.
Yeah, and we'll be getting to the Condon report, which is really interesting. I'll go ahead and
that's what that was. Yeah,
I'll go ahead and share this now since it kind of came up. this week, when I was looking for some other stuff, I came across, I was doing work on the Condon report. And for those, I'll just kind of refresh. Ironically, Keyhoe pushed really hard and lobbied for congressional hearings. He got them. And ironically, he and other researchers like J. Allen Hynek was influential. Future President Gerald Ford, who was an elected official in Michigan at the time, wanted congressional hearings. And ironically, that kind of led to the end of NICAP. In that one of the things that came out of the congressional hearings in the late 1960s was the Air Force commissioned a committee at the University of Colorado to conduct an assessment of UFO evidence. And they appointed a man named Edward Condon, a nuclear physicist, to head up this committee. You really can't get into this stuff without getting into politics of the era, though many people try to keep the two separate. But Condon was one of the first influential scientists targeted by the Committee on Un-American Activities, and he was suspected of being a communist sympathizer. But by the late 1960s, he was appointed to head up this committee, and the Air Force seems to have suspected that he would find their findings, their conclusions on UFOs to be acceptable. And yes, as Brian's alluding to, excuse me, as Brian is alluding to, Richard Hall and NICAP prepared a number of cases, probably hundreds, for the Condon Committee, and they were relatively uninterested. NICAP cried foul before the report ever came out. They knew it was not going to be favorable. And the Condon Committee's report did basically say that to continue the Air Force Project Blue Book effort of studying UFOs was probably a waste of time and not going to result in any significant scientific findings. But something I found this week that I think is pretty interesting and arguably significant to our considerations of the UFO topic as a counterintelligence tool. This was in a 1968 newspaper, and it says that Condon told the press that he reached out to Soviet scientists to collaborate on the Air Force-funded UFO study. And you can see I highlighted too in that last paragraph there where Condon says that he's basically saying, hey, you're studying them, we're studying them, why don't we compare notes and see what we can come up with? As we've been talking about, if we drop the UFO blinders and we come at this from a counterintelligence perspective, I find it virtually impossible that the Air Force would have funded something that stuck a hand across the aisle to the Soviets that was not attempting to give the Soviets bad intelligence and assess what they offered in return. I haven't done further research into this to see if they responded or how they responded. I just happened to come across this and thought I would share it.
Carl Sagan, wasn't he involved in the Condon Committee?
I don't know. Was he, guys?
He might have been sort of involved in the scientific debate in the aftermath of that. But he was reportedly also seeking Soviet cooperation or, yeah, like collaboration in the space program. So I don't know if that has got any overlaps or if that might have raised flags with the IC at all. Just by virtue of like proximity to, you know, scientists seeking Soviet cooperation. Anyway, I just put that out there.
Yeah, that's one possibility. Another possibility is because he was already viewed unfavorably, he may have been told to do it and that it would increase his standings. It also would offer some further explanation of why he was like literally falling asleep during UFO presentations. He literally did not seem to be interested in studying UFOs, according to Richard Hall, and that I think would offer some indication as to why.
That
But
account of
I just
sleeping
thought
is
I'd share that.
corroborated in multiple accounts also.
Pardon?
That account of sleeping is corroborated in multiple accounts also. So I think I agree with you. This is maybe the most proactive he was. In fact, it's the only thing I've ever seen proactive regarding Condon in the Condon Committee. Everything else seemed to be like sleepy bystander.
Good point. I never requested his FBI records through the book writing process, even though I got interested in people like Menzel and Shapley. I wasn't particularly interested in Condon because I thought there will be a lot of material about him being investigated and suspected of being a communist sympathizer, like a lot of scientists were. And I didn't want to invest the time trying to figure out the nuance of it. But finding this article motivated me to take more of an interest, and I went ahead and shot a request over to the FBI for Condon's records, because now I would have a date and something more in mind that I'm looking for. Like, what would the FBI records say around the time that he was supposedly collaborating or offering to collaborate with Russian scientists?
So when was that newspaper article?
I think it was 1968.
Because he did, in fact, meet with an attaché from the Soviet embassy in the spring of 1967. In fact, the Condon files have a folder, Soviet embassy, about his meeting. And it actually, during the FBI investigation with Army Counterintelligence in August 1968, they bring up the fact that they knew he had met with Russian attachés from the Soviet embassy to talk about UFOs. So there was, I guess, some collaboration at least. But from the memos, that just quickly reading them, you know, while you guys were talking, it looks like they weren't really impressed. They're like, the Dr. Felix Zeigel, whatever the guy's name is, a big prominent Soviet ufologist, basically says he's a pulp hack writer, you know, that, you know, isn't really credible. And the other guy, Stolarov, that ran the Stolarov Commission, which is kind of like, I don't know, maybe Russia's blue book of a sort. And so they weren't really impressed with what they learned from Russia, apparently. But it did FBI interest that he had met with these people in the first place.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That certainly is more pieces of the puzzle. It would like when I read that article, one, I wonder why he'd tell the press. Like, what's his point of putting this in the press? Another thing I read into it is the Soviets aren't gullible. I mean, if they're invited to collaborate, like how those of you that follow my writing and follow Erica Luke's and my videos and stuff at Expanding Frontiers are familiar with the records we got on the International Astronomical Union and how there was a lot of back and forth with intelligence agencies, with Soviet astronomers and American scientists meeting at international conventions. And it seems to me almost like everybody knows embassies are full of spies, but like that's how the game's played. Like, the embassies are the chessboard. Let's get it out and we'll play, because we'll get some opportunities and you might get some opportunities, but we'll try to give you bad intelligence while getting good intelligence from you. My whole point being to invite the Soviets to collaborate on UFOs just feels to me like an invitation to, can we take our Cold War into the UFO arena? Like the Russians wouldn't be gullible and think, well, let's tell them what we know about paranormal phenomena and stuff like that. I think it would be like an invitation to, let's make some information exchanges. You try to figure out what's real about ours. We try to figure out what's real about yours. And like, that's just how I read it. Like, I think, the Soviets were competent in their intelligence agencies as well. They wouldn't be completely credulous going into this, is an aspect of it I personally would find potentially interesting. And again, thank you, Jeff, for pointing that out, that he did actually meet with them and knew he had at the time he told the newspaper that he'd reached out to them.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that we kind of learned from the hearing, or not hearing, but PR event that they had yesterday, was that a lot of what Grush kind of was initially learned about this stuff, he learned apparently from the Thread 3 documents that Knapp obtained from, a bunch of shady spies. And as somebody pointed out, is there such thing as a non-shady spy? So I guess spy that he bought the information from in Russia. And of course, he claims that he then further got it verified from his own sources that what he read in these documents were accurate and whatnot. But it seems there's probably somebody sitting in Russia right now that's totally ecstatic that their disinformation that they sold George Knapp decades ago is largely a basis for what's being promoted now.
As recently as I think it was 2018, there was a international conference funded by, in part, the Chinese, held in Moscow, that invited American ufologists, that was an international effort at UFO disclosure and collaborating on the UFO topic. So it's not all Cold War history by any means, no. And it is just absurd that George Knapp is basically briefing the people that are making congressional testimony, and he could brief the elected officials as well on what the others think they know if he felt like it.
Yeah, that George Knapp had to be the one to provide these documents to Congress in the first place is a bit ridiculous, but that's the case because he did provide them to Congress.
And also notice how the spooks like Lakatsky, people involved in ORSAP, ATIP, none of those guys have testified to Congress. Unless you count Elizondo, who's like involved in the follow-up, kind of the unofficial version of ATIP. But like not the core people, like Lakatsky, Kelleher, those guys, none of them have testified, right?
No, it's largely an insult to intelligence.
But they have put quite a few books out, Luis.
Yeah, read the paperback. It's all in there. There you go. Shall we read another section?
In late September 1961, Major Keyhoe was written a letter by Betty Hill. She described the now famous UFO sightings she experienced with her husband Barney less than a week earlier. Richard Hill forwarded Betty's letter to Walter N. Webb, who headed the Massachusetts NICAP Unit 1 subcommittee at Cambridge. Webb was an astronomer who studied under Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Betty's September 26, 1961 letter to Keyhoe did not include a description of having been abducted and examined by aliens. It seems to have taken the Hills a while to develop those perceptions. Her letter stated, Barney saw, quote, many figures scurrying about, end quote, on a pancake-shaped craft when he viewed it through binoculars. Betty added Barney's mind has completely blacked out about what happened after he made the observation, and indicated the couple was considering the services of a competent psychiatrist who used hypnotism. Walter Webb soon made contact with the Hills. His October 26, 1961 resulting initial report is considered documentation of the first interview conducted with the Hills by a UFO investigator. Some future researchers refer to it as a significant tool in identifying ways the story evolved and has seemingly embellished over time. Webb wrote a final report on the Hill case in 1965. Points of interest include an assessment of the case as rendered by Dr. Benjamin Simon, the psychiatrist who worked with the couple and implemented hypnosis, apparently as a means to retreat emotional trauma. Webb explained Simon believed the Hills saw an aircraft of some kind, either conventional or perhaps classified, during what came to be known as the first encounter. The doctor did not suspect it was an alien spacecraft. Likewise, Simon did not believe the Hills encountered aliens at a later point in the evening. Quote, regarding the second encounter, the abduction story, Webb wrote, Simon believes it happened only in Betty Hill's dreams, and that Barney, upon hearing his wife tell about her dreams repeatedly, felt he must have been abducted too. Simon's position has been misrepresented repeatedly as subscribing to alien abduction as an explanation for the Hill case. Not only did Walter Webb document in 1965 the psychiatrist stated no such thing, but multiple sources have concurred, including statements attributed to those familiar with the investigation. The position of Dr. Simon, as reported by Mr. Webb, was also clarified as statements made by Dr. Simon himself. The incorrect framing of Simon's position nonetheless often persist. In 2016, I wrote about my interactions with Massachusetts mental health professional Donna Killing, who explained she felt duped by the UFO community and its misrepresentation of Simon's opinions on the Hills' reported abduction. Killeen stated that she was once impressed a prestigious psychiatrist was apparently supporting the story, and how that was a critical part of the case to her. It was upon speaking directly to Dr. Simon in the 70s that she came to think otherwise. Keeling described how Simon explained to her that although he was portrayed in books and the media as believing the Hills were abducted by aliens, he actually never thought that was a likely scenario. Keeling stated Simon indicated he suspected the Hills' perceptions arose out of anxiety and dreams, as Webb likewise documented in 1965 to be the doctor's stance. After speaking directly with Dr. Simon, Killian explained to me, I felt duped by the UFO community and media. There was misrepresentation of Dr. Simon's conclusions in the Hill case. These false conclusions were widely continued on in movies, books, etc. I was very disappointed and discounted the case as a result of hearing the truth from the practitioner. NICAP and Webb's 1960s documentation of the circumstances would certainly be considered relevant contributions to the genre. That's the case even if the contribution may not have turned out quite like it was initially intended.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for reading. So that's a big can of worms, Betty and Barney Hill, but thoughts?
Yeah, I had written a bit about some other NICAP figures who visited the hills not long after the Keyhoe letter, and kind of like the other NICAP members, they were like, oh, this UFO may have been searching for fertilizer for some reason, you know. It's Robert Homan and C.D. Jackson. And they're both IBM employees. C.D. Jackson gets confused a lot in ufology for being the Time Life magazine psychological operations guy, because that seems to fit very perfectly. But it's actually not him. It's actually still interesting because the C.D. Jackson that worked at IBM was involved in the SAGE program for the Air Force, which is the semi-automatic ground environment, I think is what that stands for. Basically early digital mapping of like landscapes for obviously warfighters and things like that. So, and not to say that that's why he would be a disinformer. It's just an interesting extra little touch when the hills seem to find themselves surrounded by the people at the nearby Air Force base, and you know, just interesting stuff. Like you said, it's a can of worms. That's just one worm. I wanted to add my worm.
It is a can full.
It's actually the anniversary today of when Valet, Homan, and what's his face, Jackson were visiting the hills, and when they were doing their little sky watch, and Valet wasn't really too impressed with their little sky watch. Yeah, that happened on the weekend of June 10th through the 12th of 1967.
Yeah, and Valet writes about how, I think it's Homan keeps calling him and saying, we've got to move on to phase 2. And Valet's like, I have no idea what that means.
Let's give a shout out to Martin Cannon for one of the more compelling takes on the Hill case as well. It's intriguing takes that he theorized how it may have been a human instigated interaction, and something like the possibilities we've discussed of the Villas-Boas case, something along those lines of some type of CIA behavioral experimentation. My personal opinion is I think most people would agree the most likely scenario is they were confused, and two people over a couple of years together discussing the event developed perceptions about it, and then those were further gone off the rails with hypnosis. I think most people would agree is high hand to beat. Now, that stated, I do find it compelling that given their circles, as Tanner said, They were surrounded by Air Force personnel. I think it was an Air Force officer that initially suggested hypnosis as a memory retrieval tool. They went to a city, Boston, that was currently hosting an MK Ultra hypnosis subproject. So my point being, whether they were initially targeted or not, it's difficult for me to envision that this mixed couple didn't attract the attention at some point of intelligence agencies. At a bare minimum, can I see that hypnosis file and see what happened? Like, at a bare minimum. So I think there's, again, as you know, the theme of the evening, if intelligence people get involved, it kind of, at that point, you just kind of go, I don't know why. It's just an interesting story, and we don't know what they were doing.
Tinfoil hat. Joseph Bryan joins NICAP 5 months after the Betty and Barney Hill piece, and he's the shadowy MK Ultra guy.
That he is. That he is.
Well, I think too, even the release of some of the Hills, I can't remember if it's the tapes or not the notes. I think it's the tapes, but like it's like Simon's secretary or something like that gives them to the press, which seems to me to be kind of an insane you know, I mean it was the MK Ultra time, so I know medical ethics weren't exactly at their highest point, but that still seems, you know, like something you wouldn't see until the Bob Bigelow days.
A question I'd like to have answered that I've never bothered to dig into, Jeff probably knows some about this. How frequently did Dr. Simon record his sessions where he was treating trauma? Like, wouldn't that be relevant? Like, what are they doing in their Sunday best posing for photos with their therapist? You know?
Yeah, I don't know about that, how often he recorded him, but it does seem odd that, you know, here we got a photo. Yeah, I'd presume that he recorded most of his sessions, but I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm a mental health advocate, and I've been to counseling, and we never did a photo shoot.
Another funny element from the valet meeting the Hills trip is Simon is actually there too. And apparently he's basically shirtless the whole time. It's not really explained why.
Well, I wasn't expecting that.
Not that I wanted to curse you with that image, because that's.
I will, tinfoil hat firmly in place. I'll go as far as to say this. It does seem like, at a minimum, recording those hypnosis sessions that, by the doctor's definition, were to treat trauma, not for memory enhancing, not memory retrieval about alien abduction, but to treat trauma. It would seem like recording those sessions would be a sign, at a minimum, a sign of the MK Ultra culture in Boston. And I'm alluding to Dr. Martin Orne, or Orne, however it's pronounced, that was also Harvard, like Dr. Simon. it would seem that that would at least be a reflection of the culture that we like to record and document what we're doing with clients.
I think you also kind of might have to remember that I believe Dr. Simon was actually one of the early pioneers of using hypnosis in this topic. And so I believe there'd be a bit of self-promotion involved with, recording how successful this new technique of yours is in helping people, and perhaps being a little bit more unethical with sharing that kind of stuff with media and elsewhere, because you're trying to promote this new, what is essentially a burgeoning kind of field at the time that, is new and most people don't really know about. And so I can see him kind of leaking this kind of stuff out strictly from a self-promotional kind of to help promote the field of hypnosis in general kind of view as well.
Yeah, he was like doing their version, that era's version of like the talk show circuit and stuff about the hills, that Barney didn't seem on board with it, but Betty never seemed to mind the promotion at all. Like she seemed to want to talk far and wide as well.
Did the FBI have any files on the hills? Like, wasn't this the era of COINTELPRO? And I think they've done some civil rights work as well. So I don't know if that overlaps at all.
I think that's a very relevant question. The hills kind of fell into that area for me, kind of like Dr. Condon, that I didn't really have a specific reason to like look at their files, but I kind of figured maybe incorrectly that a million people before me would have looked at them. But I do follow your line of thinking there, Luis, that if they weren't involved in some aspect of COINTELPRO, the FBI missed a real good opportunity to do some field work.
Well, I think it's Martin Cannon again talking with Eric at some point. He mentions a phone call he had heard. Obviously, this is like secondhand, but Martin Cannon's a pretty compelling source, and he basically got the impression that the Hills were not just normal civil rights activists, but were in fact like pro-Soviet communists, which would have most certainly put them on COINTELPRO chaos, even if their civil rights work didn't do it.
My experience, the FBI files I've read and like what I've seen them allude to about Shapley and Menzel, what I'm expecting them to have on Condon, what I've seen was written about McDonald and his wife Betsy, James McDonald and his wife Betsy, the UFO activists, and God forbid, voting rights activists. If you weren't pretty much staunch right-wing conservative, that would in itself have you labeled a communist sympathizer. But I would completely expect the Hills to have been identified once they were identified at all. Like if some kind of file got open, my experience would be I'd completely expect them to be espionage investigation, subversion investigation, un-American investigation. Yeah.
Which makes it all the stranger that they keep going over to the Air Force for dinner. It's just, it's just like into the lion's den kind of.
How much did they know at that time? Like in 1968, how much was known about COINTELPRO or MK Ultra? Or, I mean, obviously the Black Panthers were not trusting. But I think you kind of got like to protest was to be lumped in with a terrorist extremist group, which we can somewhat relate to now, can we not? Like to express dissent may be considered enemy of the state land.
Now we're Antifa.
I'm stomping all in it, aren't I?
I was gonna
And then
mention
communists.
just because James McDonald and his wife came up, Anne Druffel, who of course her collection is housed by EFR. Her book has all kinds of great stuff about you know, the Black Panthers were speaking in were they in Tucson? I can't remember where. But they stayed at the McDonald's house and like essentially slept with their guns. And you know, you think about that with like James McDonald, it's just kind of bizarre.
Yeah, the physics professor over at the college. Yeah.
Well, and there's a bit in there where she talks about how where he worked at the University of Arizona, everybody knew the campus CIA officer's name. And I just find it so fascinating that despite McDonald being like he's like involved in environmentalist stuff that could be perceived as subversive. He was signed his name on the Fair Play for Cuba committee. His wife was in the Socialist Workers Party, and no, it was the UFOs that got him killed. You know, I mean, I think he killed himself first of all, but I find it funny that the UFOs is where people go.
Oh
when they
yeah,
talk about a plot. You know.
I follow your metaphor. Yeah, I mean that of all his activities, it seems like UFOs was a bridge too far for the IC. So why would that have been? Why would that have been? That like I asked that question from the perspective of because one of the reasons disclosure can't happen is because they don't have anything to disclose about extraterrestrial or non-human aircraft. And the more they muck around in the topic at all, the more subject they are to talking about their own deception operations and their own exploitation of the topic. So if they lean on someone and intimidate them to leave the topic alone, would that suggest a Paul Benowitz type situation that you have no idea what you're right on top of and you need to turn around and walk in the other direction? Like, that's what I meant by why would that be that of all the things he was doing, they objected to his UFO work?
I think similar to kind of how we were talking about Condon, he was one of the American ufologists who was actively seeking communication with the Soviets. And contrary to like, you know, probably what like ufologists and the US government thought, it was probably just in pure scientific inquiry because he never really had the same level of his wife was the Socialist Workers Party member, and I don't think he was ever a member himself. In fact, I think that's what kind of strained their marriage, even though he'd go along with stuff to a point. That's just to say, like, I think the Soviet ufology might have been the bridge too far.
Yeah,
Perhaps.
yeah.
Well, did you know that once Dr. Condon in February 1967 actually wrote a letter to the governor of Utah informing him that he got a letter from someone saying there was going to be a UFO landing that happened on the Salt Flats, the Bonneville Salt Flats, for the purpose of establishing interplanetary fellowship and communications. And he thought the governor of Utah, Mr. Calvin Hampton at the time, should know about this in case the landing, happened.
And what year was that?
February 1967.
There you go. Busy time.
Yeah.
That was considerate of him.
Wasn't it?
Was.
Well, I think, go ahead.
I used to say he was even planning on attending, going himself, Condon, with a couple of people from the project. I don't know if he ever followed up on that and did go, or if that was a joke he was telling to the governor. But he did say he thought that two of them might go and attend in case anything happened.
Any final thoughts? Let's spend a few minutes with closing reflections.
I want to give a shout out to Edward Condon for having a middle name with a U initial. I find that's very unusual and interesting.
Yeah, and an article that I clipped, they get his name right in the article, but in the picture they call it Edward V. Condon because it is just so unusual. Yeah.
Do you know what it was?
I'd have to look. I don't off the top of my head. Who can give it to her?
Euler? Or Euler?
And now you keep repeating it, and it sounds like the Ferris Bueller joke.
Euler, uh-huh.
Weird. UHLER.
Any final thoughts, Brian?
I think the blinders, like the fact it came back up again, even with the Betty and Barney thing, that the fact that the doctor's opinion was that this was not an abduction, and then everyone ran with the really good story of it being an abduction is classic. And you can't do anything about that. Like that, you can't. There's no amount of media literacy can cure that. It'll always happen, and then the next fire will start. So I think it's very fascinating. But yeah.
Good point. One has to be willing to apply the media literacy. That's right. Even if they learn it, they have to be willing to apply it.
And the thing is, people don't even bring up the letter to Keyhoe. In coverage of the Hill case, they almost never bring up the fact that she actually reported the sighting to NICAP within a week. Like, because it doesn't fit with the abduction narrative. And so it's just left off. And unless you've actually like read Webb's original report on the case, you've probably missed out on that completely.
Yes. There's a whole nother conspiracy angle that this case goes into. I think we touched on it recently, and that's that Raymond Fowler, who had done a book on that case in France, where I butcher the name, Pensée Esprit, or however it's pronounced, of the mass hallucinations that some suspect was it. Go ahead, Tim.
You mean John Fuller?
Fuller, thank you. I just go crazy with the Ray Palmer. Everybody's like Ray Palmer. That's
Well, and
the
then
problem.
after Ray Palmer, the Fate magazine editor was Curtis Fuller, so it only gets more annoying.
I think they do that to us on purpose. That's why you need a good, strange name like Edward U. Condon. But yes, so John Fuller, correct? Thank you. He wrote about the Pensée Esprit event, and then he went to the Hills home and he helped doctor this into an abduction story. And there have been researchers that thought that he had a financial interest or was a CIA asset trying to run cover in these circumstances for intelligence agencies.
He
I
also
don't
wrote a
have
book
anything
on,
to necessarily support that. I just think it's interesting that, go ahead.
he also, we were talking about this, episodes ago, I think. But he also wrote a book on Zé Arrigo, the surgeon of the Rusty Knife in South America, which, like we talked, was it in the book club or was it separate? We were talking about psychic surgeons being monitored.
I
as part of,
recall
like,
the
sleight of hand
conversation.
tricks.
Yeah.
But that's another case where, you know, it certainly would be fitting for Fuller to see. Now I'm second guessing myself. I almost said Fowler. Fuller did something like that.
Yeah, and that's where it does get difficult. Like we were talking about the skeptics that would be like, "Do you have anything to support that?" And it's like, well, no, not really. And you make a valid point that some author running around sensationalizing his interviews wouldn't be the strangest thing that ever happened. No, but it's an interesting take. It's an interesting angle on it that, if not Fuller, did the CIA have any authors that were putting a light on it, how they would want things framed, and what authors might that be? Like, I think we quoted earlier in another episode some 1,000 books written for the CIA that they don't acknowledge which 1,000. Yeah. Yeah, these are very relevant and interesting questions. Like, okay, so maybe not Fuller, maybe not even in the UFO arena, but what topics are spun with financing from intelligence agencies? I would think politics, foreign affairs. Yeah.
Well,
There's a lot of people surrounding. Oh, go ahead, Jeff. Sorry.
I was just gonna say I don't remember the exact like breakup, but there was also a big financial kind of payday for this book, The Interrupted Journey, that not only went to Fuller, I believe Benjamin Simon himself got like a big percentage cut of the payday for the book. And then of course the Hills got a payday or a check for the book as well. And they sold, again, a lot of copies of this book. And Benjamin Simon did the intro, but because it consists of a large amounts of transcripts from his hypnosis sessions, he got, I believe, a pretty significant chunk of the actual like sales of like the book. So they did make a good amount of money on this.
Any other
Yeah.
thoughts?
I mean, just to build on that, I mean, what Jeff was just saying, this case became Betty Hill's like whole life, right? She spent her whole life going to conventions, and selling copies of the book and signing autographs and doing the whole thing, paid speaker gig and all that stuff. She had endless other sightings and experiences and telepathic communications as time went on. So yeah, although I don't think that maybe monetary gain was initially what spurred what was going on there. It certainly became, like it doesn't often in these cases, it certainly became the reason to be.
Good point.
Well, and it's funny that Betty Hill was kind of a debunker when it came to other people's abduction events or UFO sightings. Like that was just nonsense people were talking about. Hers, she was real. She was the true abductee.
Yeah, she was that way, it seems, which is interesting. Yes.
Reminds me of Stanton Friedman.
Who was another, biographer of the Hills.
Yeah, he was very good at scrutinizing other people's works and claim. Not so good at scrutinizing his own research, unfortunately.
Well, then his niece, like you say, who wrote the book with Kathleen Martin, went on to have her own basically entire UFO career built out of the fact that her aunt saw a UFO once or was abducted,
Yes.
But she did at least leave us with that great clip of don't talk to UFO investigators, don't get hypnotized, which, you can cut that out of context and it looks pretty good.
Were you going to say something else, Luis?
Yeah, J. Allen Hynek's son recently or relatively recently got in on this whole paper, didn't he? But I'm not clear about the details on that, but I think he's made some appearances here and there, kind of canvassing the reputation of his father. I
believe he was just at Contact in the Desert last week or whenever that was, with everyone. And he's been to, I've actually seen him at I think at least 2 or 3 different UFO conferences in like the last decade, just personally. So yeah, he's making the rounds.
Yes, J. Allen Hynek's son, Paul, has described himself as a spokesperson for Bitcoin. And we did a blog post at Expanding Frontiers Research on various characters that promote questionable financial investments and promote belief in an alien presence and UFOs. And I watched one video in particular of Paul Hynek, stating that Bitcoin and UFOs were together at last, and suggesting that they would be the that Bitcoin, as I recall, that Bitcoin would that like if you were into UFOs, you should be into Bitcoin in this video. And for the blog post, I emailed him and asked him to explain that further, and he did not respond to my email.
UFOs and Bitcoin being together at last sounds like the Trump administration, right?
It's not that, it'll be prediction markets too. That's the other thing that'll go hand in hand. Are UFOs real? place your bets. And then, of course, you're going to have people, in those soft markets that could be easily swung, push a narrative and then hedge the bets and make a lot of money and make a lot of people miss their bag. Like there's a lot of fraudulent strings that come attached to that. You're seeing it already.
Just saw it this week, in fact. Fox News tweeting out on Twitter about aliens and UFOs. What's the likelihood? Blah, blah, blah. Only it's paid promotion. It was paid for sponsored by Kalshi. And so, like, it looks like normal news, and it is normal news because they're airing it during normal news times, like it's actual news reports, but they're sponsored by a prediction market. And the whole point, as Brian pointed out, is to manipulate the narrative and the betting tables, like, to someone's advantage. And it's absolutely insane. And the same thing is true for a lot of the mainstream influencers on social media, like X, are either paid by Polymarket or Kalshi, and they'll even list in their profile how they're sponsored by these things. So how can you trust what these people are putting out if they're literally being paid by a betting market to manipulate the news stream?
Right.
I think hearing that as another piece, this all fits in with what we frequently talk about in our other book club about this whole, like, it's just putting it all together to like the end of times or something. Like, it's just, this all works. It's all the tech bros and co-opting whatever they can to get, I don't know. It just seems to all come together.
It's like a plot of a James Bond movie. In fact, I believe that was some of them, where you manipulate the news, get rich,
Yes.
make money.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's already been basically crypto scam coins that the disclosure community has tried to put forward, where there's some people that, pulled the rug underneath them and probably made a little bit of payday. But by and large, you're always going to lose out on these things. You're not going to help disclosure by buying into this crypto scam coin.
Well, that blog post that we did, and it's been a couple years ago now, also cited Avi Loeb from Harvard spoke at a Bitcoin function. And, he has all these outlandish statements, like he's a go-to guy for the press. If they want a sensational statement about aliens, he'll give them one. And he has responded to my request for comment on other topics, like we got some FBI records once indicating the FBI was taking a look at his project at Harvard, and he did provide me comment on that. But when I asked him about, how, like, what does Bitcoin have to do with your work, he did not want to discuss that, apparently.
Well, one of the people involved in the disclosure community, and I think he's involved with the Disclosure Foundation or whatever, is a guy named Matthew Pines, who's his other job is executive director at the Bitcoin Policy Institute, where he promotes Bitcoin and AI and other stuff. And so if you search him online, it's like half videos about UAP and disclosure, half videos of him, promoting, the use of Bitcoin and stuff. So there's a lot of people that are very tied into both of these kind of communities right now.
Yes, thank you. Any final comments?
Allison, to what you're saying, the singularity, which is the idea that artificial intelligence will surpass human intellect and then just accelerate from there, that and UFOs intersect.
Yeah, they do to some extent. Yeah.
Or not that they
Well, and then
with
disclosure
futurists. With
is-
futurists.
but then also the disclosure as being some big event that's going to happen, like Jack said earlier, and it's going to change everything and
Yeah, the
propel
narrative.
things forward quickly.
Yeah,
Right.
the narratives intersect into a new dawning of humanity. Yeah.
The UFO topic has always had a kind of eschatological quality to it, where you know, the technology of the free energy is going to be available to humanity, and we're going to enter a golden age, right? But now it seems like there's a kind of culmination of all those narratives with the tech bros and AI and Bitcoin, especially with the anti-establishment, anti-consensus reality stuff that a lot of these, especially right-wing media ecosystem elements are pushing, using UFOs as leverage in that as well. And I think it's kind of just all mixing together and reinforcing each other.
Tech has always been fascinated with this idea of disruption and disruptive technologies that are kind of going to revolutionize and like change the way we do things. And in the same way that UFOs is the exact same thing, people think that once the disclosure of UFOs comes, it's going to bring upon this kind of utopian kind of like, you know, new way of living with free energy and all this kind of crazy stuff. And so I think there's obviously a reason, that might be a reason why tech bros are kind of interested in the UFO topic, is because they've kind of always been interested in disruptive, you know, ideas that are going to change things. And that's the same thing with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is this disruptive technology that's going to overtake and change the financial, you know, industry and economy. And so they all kind of come down to this idea of disruption that's going to happen and bring about a better kind of way of life after this disruption happens.
Yes. Well, thank you, everyone. I want to again sincerely thank each of you. I'm so glad that you came. I will send all of you an invitation again for next week. I've really enjoyed your input tonight. And if you're listening or watching at home, please visit Expanding Frontiers Research at expandingfrontiersresearch.org. I'd also encourage you to visit our Patreon account, where you can find more resources like videos on media literacy and learning how to learn, helpful posts and videos on filing FOIA requests. It's at our Patreon that we typically share FOIA records as we receive them. We kind of share the raw records there. And then I will do more comprehensive blog posts later at expandingfrontiersresearch.org. So go over to the Patreon and get yourself a free account and follow us there as well. Of course, if you would like to financially support us, that is always helpful as well. Expanding Frontiers Research is a Salt Lake City-based nonprofit organization, tax exempt under Section 501c3 of the U.S. Internal Revenue Code. Last but not least, if you feel like you would be a good fit for our group, and we are always welcoming more thoughtful discussion, please reach out to me at email address jackbrewerblog@yahoo.com. Let me know. I'll send you a free PDF of the book and include you in the Zoom invitations. All of this information, the links, the email address, and links to websites and records that we have referenced in tonight's discussion will be in the video description on YouTube. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Wayward Sons Book Group.